He sneered, "My badge trumps your hashtags." Veteran cop Mallister thought arresting activist Marisol Vega proved he was untouchable. Then, the unthinkable, his own daughter took the stand. Voice trembling, she exposed his lies, his planted evidence, his chilling boasts of teaching thugs lessons. Witness the raw courtroom moment that shattered a family and ignited a city's demand for justice against police brutality. Will accountability prevail? Find out. The late afternoon sun, fractured by the skeletal branches of Detroit's winter-bare trees, cast long, distorted shadows across the pavement. The air, sharp with the promise of a deeper freeze, carried the rhythmic chants of protest, a raw pulse against the city's hum. No justice, no peace, no racist police. The signs bobbed, a patchwork quilt of anger and hope held aloft by bundled figures stamping their feet against the cold. Officer Ryan Mallister surveyed the scene, a familiar stage for his particular brand of authority. 20 years on the force had weathered him, etching lines around eyes that held a cynical gleam. His uniform, crisp and blue, felt like a second skin, a carapace against the world's messy demands. He saw the protesters not as citizens exercising a right, but as an inconvenience, a noisy disruption to the order he was sworn to uphold, or rather, the order he preferred. His gaze snagged on Marisol Vega. 24, vibrant even in the fraying gray light, her voice cutting through the din as she addressed the crowd through a megaphone. She was a known quantity, a community organizer whose sharp intellect and unwavering dedication made her a persistent thorn in the side of the department's status quo. She spoke of accountability, of Tyre Nichols, of Breonna Taylor, of George Floyd, names that hung heavy in the cold air, invoked like prayers or curses. She spoke of patterns of unchecked power, of the blue wall of silence. Mallister felt a familiar surge of irritation tighten his chest. Another agitator. He moved with practiced ease, shouldering through the edge of the crowd, his partner trailing nervously behind him. Mallister liked making examples. He believed it deterred the others, kept the streets manageable. He saw Marisol step down from the makeshift crate she'd used as a platform, saw her talking animatedly with a group of young people. That was his moment. "Marisol Vega," he barked, his voice loud enough to momentarily silence the nearest chance. Heads turned. Phones, already recording, focused. Marisol turned, her expression shifting from passionate engagement to wary defiance. "Officer Mallister, you're inciting a riot," he stated flatly, his hand already reaching for the handcuffs clipped to his belt. It was a flimsy pretext, even by his standards. The protest was loud, impassioned, but peaceful. "Inciting?" Marisol's eyebrow arched. "We're demanding justice." "There's a difference." "Not from where I'm standing," Mallister retorted, grabbing her arm. Marisol flinched but stood her ground. "You have no grounds for this, Mallister. We have permits. We are exercising our First Amendment rights." Her voice was steady, laced with the steel he'd come to resent. "Resisting arrest? Now?" He tightened his grip, twisting her arm behind her back. A collective gasp went through the nearby protesters. Shouts erupted. "Let her go." "Shame, I'm not resisting," Marisol gritted out, pain flashing across her face. "I'm stating facts." The cold metal of the handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. Mallister shoved her forward slightly, a petty assertion of dominance. "You're gonna regret this," Marisol warned, her dark eyes locking onto his. There was no fear in them, only a chilling certainty. Mallister laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Save the drama, sweetheart. My badge trumps your hashtags any day of the week." He steered her towards the waiting patrol car, ignoring the escalating shouts, the cameras capturing his smirk. He felt the familiar rush of control, the satisfying weight of the badge on his chest. Untouchable. High above the street, in a fourth-floor apartment overlooking the unfolding scene, Evelyn Harper watched, her hands gripping the arms of her wheelchair. 70 years old, her body bore the physical map of a long fight, the pronounced limp, a permanent souvenir from a police baton during a civil rights march in Chicago decades ago, now compounded by the arthritis that confined her to the chair. But her eyes, sharp and discerning behind elegant glasses, missed nothing. She saw Mallister's swagger, the unnecessary force, Marisol's defiant posture, even in cuffs. She saw the familiar, ugly choreography of power abused. A lifetime of battles flashed through her mind, the lost cases, the small victories, the systemic rot she'd fought first as a public defender, then as a judge. She recognized Mallister's type instantly, the kind of officer who believed the uniform granted impunity, the kind who mistook brutality for strength. The kind who had destroyed lives, including one devastatingly close to her own. Her jaw tightened. The sight of Marisol, her Marisol, the bright, fierce young woman she'd mentored since she was a teenager. Being manhandled by a man like Mallister ignited a cold fire in her chest. This wasn't just another arrest. It was a continuation, an echo of injustices she knew too well. With deliberate, steady fingers, Evelyn reached for her phone. She scrolled through her contacts, her thumb hovering over a name. Kwame Okoro, her protege, a brilliant civil rights attorney forged in the same fires that had shaped her, albeit a generation later. She pressed the call button, the electronic tone a stark contrast to the shouts rising from the street below. Kwame answered on the second ring, his voice calm and professional. Judge Harper? Everything all right? Evelyn's voice was low, resonant with decades of banked fury and resolve. Kwame, she said, her gaze fixed on the flashing lights of the patrol car pulling away with Marisol inside. They just arrested Marisol. Officer Ryan Mallister. She paused, letting the weight of the name settle. It's time. The scent of stale coffee and desperation clung to the air in the Cook County Public Defender's office back in 1985. Evelyn, then in her early 30s, felt it seep into her clothes, her hair, her very soul. She was younger then, fueled by righteous anger and a perhaps naive belief that the scales of justice, however tarnished, could still be balanced. She moved with a quick, determined stride, the limp barely noticeable yet a dull ache rather than the sharp command it would later become. She had just lost a case defending young Marcus Jones, a black teenager accused of armed robbery based on the flimsiest of eyewitness testimony coerced, she was certain, by the arresting officer, a veteran named Kowalski with a reputation whispered about in courthouse corridors. Evelyn had fought tooth and nail, exposing inconsistencies, highlighting Kowalski's history of complaints, presenting alibi witnesses. But the jury, swayed by the uniform and the prosecutor's narrative of inner-city menace, had delivered a guilty verdict. Marcus's mother had collapsed in the gallery, a wail tearing through the courtroom's tense silence, a sound Evelyn carried home with her, heavy as stones. That night, her husband Isaiah found her staring blankly at case files spread across their small dining table, the remnants of a cold dinner untouched. Isaiah Washington, her rock, her partner in passion and purpose. He was a grassroots journalist, running a small, independent newspaper that chronicled the stories the mainstream press ignored: housing discrimination, police misconduct, the struggles and triumphs of Chicago's black community. His typewriter clacked late into many nights, fueled by coffee and conviction. He wrapped his arms around her, his chin resting on her head. Rough day, Ev, she nodded, leaning back into his warmth. We lost Marcus Jones. Kowalski got him. Isaiah sighed, a heavy sound. That bastard. I've been digging into him. There's a pattern, Evelyn. Extortion planted evidence, but no one wants to talk on the record. Fear runs deep. Fear is his weapon, Evelyn murmured. And the system protects him. Just weeks later, Isaiah's digging got too close. He was working on a story linking Kowalski to a slumlord protection racket. One evening, he didn't come home. Evelyn's frantic calls went unanswered. Then, the call came from the precinct. Isaiah had been arrested. Resisting arrest, assaulting an officer, Kowalski himself. The charges were ludicrous, transparently false, designed to silence him. The fight to exonerate Isaiah became Evelyn's crucible. It wasn't just a case. It was her life, her love, her belief in justice itself on the line. She pored over every detail, interviewed reluctant witnesses, navigated the treacherous currents of internal affairs, faced down veiled threats. She saw firsthand how the system could be weaponized, how easily truth could be suffocated by power and prejudice. It was during a protest outside the courthouse demanding Isaiah's release that the baton found her leg. A chaotic surge, police moving in with force, the sharp, sickening crack as the wood connected with bone. She went down, the pain blinding, but her eyes found Isaiah's face in the transport van window, anguish mixed with pride. That moment seared itself into her memory, fueling her resolve. The limp became a physical manifestation of her fight, a constant reminder of the cost of speaking truth to power. She won. Eventually. After months of relentless struggle, exposing Kowalski's lies and the fabricated evidence, the charges against Isaiah were dropped. Kowalski was quietly transferred, shielded from real consequences by the blue wall. Isaiah's name was cleared, but the ordeal left scars on them both. His faith in his city was shaken, though his commitment to journalism deepened, becoming sharper, more focused. For Evelyn, the experience was transformative. It burned away the last vestiges of naivete, replacing it with a steely determination. She realized that fighting from the outside wasn't enough. She needed to understand the system from within to wield its power for true justice. It was the spark that ignited her path towards the judiciary. Decades passed. Isaiah's fearless journalism continued until cancer claimed him far too soon, leaving Evelyn with his legacy, his journals filled with meticulous notes and passionate editorials, and an unfillable void. She rose through the ranks, becoming Judge Evelyn Harper, known for her sharp legal mind, her unwavering fairness, and her quiet insistence on dignity in her courtroom. But she never forgot her roots, never forgot Marcus Jones or what happened to Isaiah. Retirement didn't mean withdrawal. It meant refocusing her energy. She found new purpose in mentoring the next generation of fighters. Kwame Okoro, hungry for justice after witnessing disparities growing up in Detroit, reminded her of her younger self, his sharp intellect tempered by a deep empathy. And Marisol Vega, fierce, intelligent, channeling her community's pain into organized action, reminded her of Isaiah's fire. She met them regularly in her sunlit apartment, surrounded by books and Isaiah's framed articles. She shared her experiences, not as war stories, but as lessons. She taught them strategy, resilience, the importance of meticulous preparation. She drilled into them the fundamental truth she'd learned. Power operates best in shadows, unchallenged and unseen. Never forget, she'd told them just weeks before Marisol's arrest, her voice firm, her gaze sweeping over their earnest faces. They count on us being isolated. They see individual complaints, isolated incidents. They want us to believe we're alone in our struggles. She leaned forward slightly, her eyes burning with the intensity of lived experience. But power, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper that commanded more attention than a shout. Power fears the light. It fears connection. It fears the pattern being revealed. Now, on the phone with Kwame, the pattern was crystallizing again, sharp and ugly, centered on Officer Mallister and the young woman she'd sworn to guide. The fire ignited in Chicago all those years ago surged anew, channeled through the calm resolve in her voice. It's time, Kwame. Time to bring the light. The air in the Wayne County Courthouse arraignment room was thick with a volatile mix of tension and defiance. On one side sat Officer Ryan Mallister, radiating smug confidence, flanked by his union representative. On the other, Marisol Vega stood tall beside Kwame Okoro, her expression composed despite the bruising grip marks visible on her wrist when her sleeve shifted. The gallery buzzed with supporters, activists holding small, discreet signs, concerned community members, and conspicuously present, Amir and Fatima Hassan. The Hassan siblings, barely 16 and 17, were the founders of Youth Against Brutality, a small but potent organization born from their own family's encounter with police harassment. Amir, perpetually attached to his phone, had been at the protest, live-streaming the entire event. Fatima, articulate and intense, scanned the courtroom, her eyes missing nothing. The prosecutor recited the charges: inciting a riot, resisting arrest, assaulting an officer, the last a blatant fabrication Mallister had added after Marisol allegedly kicked him while being forced into the car. Kwame listened impassively, then rose. Your Honor, Kwame began, his voice resonant and clear, we plead not guilty to all charges. Furthermore, we request immediate discovery, specifically Officer Mallister's bodycam footage from the time of the arrest. Mallister shifted slightly. The assistant prosecuting attorney conferred briefly with him, then addressed the judge. Your Honor, Officer Mallister reported a malfunction with his body-worn camera during the incident. Unfortunately, no footage was recorded. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Marisol shot a knowing look at Kwame. Convenient. Kwame didn't miss a beat. A malfunction? How unfortunate. Perhaps technology failed the officer, Your Honor, but it did not fail the public. He gestured towards the gallery. We have multiple civilian recordings of the event, including a continuous live stream captured by Mr. Amir Hassan. Amir instinctively held up his phone, Fatima nodding beside him. Mallister's eyes narrowed, his smirk faltering for the first time. Additionally, Kwame continued, his tone sharpening, Ms. Vega was arrested directly in front of Kim's corner bodega. We will be subpoenaing Mr. Kim's exterior surveillance footage, which we believe will provide a clear, unobstructed view of the entire interaction and directly contradict Officer Mallister's claims, particularly the alleged assault and the basis for the initial arrest. The judge, a weary veteran of the bench, granted the discovery request and set a date for the preliminary hearing. As Mallister exited the courtroom, brushing past reporters, his bravado seemed slightly less impenetrable. Later that day, Kwame visited Kim's corner bodega. The small store smelled of disinfectant, kimchi, and brewing coffee. Mr. J. Kim, a quiet man in his late 50s who had immigrated from Korea 2 decades prior, listened patiently as Kwame explained the situation. Mr. Kim remembered the commotion. He'd watched from his window, his heart sinking with a familiar dread. He knew Mallister, knew his reputation for shaking down local businesses for casual harassment. "He come in here sometimes," Mr. Kim said, his English careful but clear. "Always looking for trouble. Make people nervous." He hesitated, glancing towards the street. Cooperating could bring unwanted attention, potential retaliation. He had a family, a business painstakingly built. But he also remembered the fear he saw in Marisol's eyes, masked by defiance. He thought of his own children navigating a world that wasn't always welcoming. "My camera," Mr. Kim said, gesturing towards the small dome mounted outside. "It see everything. Clear." He met Kwame's eyes. "She did nothing wrong. That officer. He lie." He disappeared into the back room and returned with a USB drive. "You take. Show truth." Kwame felt a surge of gratitude mixed with respect for the man's quiet courage. "Thank you, Mr. Kim. This means more than you know." The footage was damning. It showed Mallister initiating the confrontation without provocation. It showed Marisol standing calmly, speaking, not resisting. It showed Mallister using excessive force, yanking her arm, shoving her. Crucially, as Mallister pushed Marisol towards the patrol car, the angle caught him pausing near a trash can, his back momentarily to his partner. His hand moved quickly, subtly, flicking a small plastic baggie, the kind often used for narcotics, near Marisol's feet as she stumbled. Then he discovered it, holding it up triumphantly before cuffing her. There was no kick, no assault. Just a frame-up, clumsy but potentially devastating, captured in grainy color. Planted evidence. Kwame felt a cold fury. This elevated things significantly. Meanwhile, across town, the conflict was playing out on a more personal front. Lily Mallister slammed her art school portfolio onto the kitchen table, the sound echoing in the tense silence. 18, with defiant pink streaks in her dark hair and paint smudges on her jeans, she faced her father, who was nursing a beer, the TV droning ignored in the background. "I saw the video, Dad," Lily said, her voice trembling slightly, a mixture of anger and hurt. "Amir Hassan's livestream. Everyone's sharing it." Ryan Mallister took a long pull from his beer. "Don't believe everything you see online, Lils. Bunch of cop-hating punks twisting things." "Twisting things?" Lily's voice rose. "He showed you arresting Marisol Vega. You looked cruel. And Marisol? She organizes food drives. She helped Fatima's family when their uncle was detained. She tutors kids at the community center. She's not some criminal. She's an agitator," Mallister snapped, his defensiveness rising. "Stirring up trouble, disrespecting the badge." "Disrespecting the badge?" Lily threw her hands up. "Dad, you're disrespecting it. My friends, they already distrust the police. Some of them are scared. Because of stuff like this. Because of cops like." She couldn't finish the sentence. The implication hung heavy in the air. "Like you." Mallister slammed his beer down. "I keep this city safe. While you're off in your little art world, I'm dealing with the scum, the real threats. That organizer? She's undermining everything. Sometimes you gotta get your hands dirty to keep order." "Planting evidence isn't getting your hands dirty, Dad." The words flew out before Lily could stop them, fueled by the Bodega footage someone had anonymously sent her, a clip clearly showing the baggie drop. She saw the flicker of shock, then fury in her father's eyes. "Where did you hear that?" he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. "It doesn't matter where," Lily cried, tears welling up. "Is it true? Did you plant drugs on her?" Mallister stood up abruptly, his face flushed. "You don't know what you're talking about. You're letting your bleeding heart friends poison your mind against your own father." He turned away, unable to meet her searching, accusing gaze. "Stay out of it, Lily. It's police business." Lily watched him retreat, the denial hollow, the anger a flimsy shield. The man she loved, the father who'd taught her to ride a bike and taken her to Tigers games, felt like a stranger. The foundation of her world felt cracked, unstable. She looked down at her portfolio, filled with sketches exploring themes of identity and justice. Suddenly, her art felt less like an escape and more like a responsibility. The image of Marisol's face, defiant even in handcuffs, burned in her mind. She couldn't stay out of it. Not anymore. The Detroit Community Center buzzed with an energy that pushed back against the February chill seeping through the old building's walls. Every chair was filled, people stood lining the walls, a vibrant tapestry of Detroit's diverse communities. Black, brown, Arab, Asian, white, young, old. Marisol Vega, out on bail but facing serious charges, stood at the makeshift podium, not with a megaphone this time, but with a quiet intensity that drew every eye. The arrest hadn't silenced her, it had amplified her voice. "They arrested me to make an example," Marisol said, her voice steady, echoing slightly in the crowded room. "To intimidate us, to make us afraid to speak out against injustice. But look around." She swept her hand across the room. "Are we intimidated? Are we silent?" A resounding "no" shook the room. Officer Mallister and the system that protects him, they see us as isolated problems. A protester here, a wrongful arrest there, a grieving family silenced over there. They want us fragmented. They want us to believe our pain is unique, our fight is lonely. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. "But tonight, we show them they are wrong. Tonight, we connect the dots. Tonight, we share our stories, not just as grievances, but as evidence. Evidence of a pattern." She yielded the floor, and the stories began to pour forth, raw and heartbreaking. Diego Rivera, a Puerto Rican single father working 2 jobs, stepped forward, his voice thick with emotion. He spoke of his son, Mateo, convicted of drug possession 2 years earlier after a traffic stop by Officer Mallister. "My boy," Diego choked out, "never touched drugs. Never." Mallister searched the car, found nothing. Then, suddenly, a baggie appears under the seat. Just like that. He locked eyes with Marisol. "My son is serving 3 years. 3 years for something Mallister planted. He lost his scholarship. His future, gone." A wave of murmurs, angry and sympathetic, swept the room. Next came Ayan Mohammed, a Somali immigrant and nurse, her hijab framing a face etched with worry and resolve. She spoke not of arrest, but of fear, of the insidious collaboration between local police and immigration and customs enforcement, ICE. "We came here seeking refuge," she said, her voice trembling slightly but gaining strength. "But we cannot trust those sworn to protect us. Friends, neighbors, picked up on minor traffic violations, handed over to ICE. We hear Officer Mallister brag about cleaning up the neighborhood. Does he mean tearing families apart?" Her story resonated deeply, highlighting another facet of policing that disproportionately affected immigrant communities. As the testimonies continued, a grim tapestry of misconduct emerged, threads converging around Mallister but pointing to a larger, systemic failure. Then Kwame Okoro took the floor, holding a thick file. "These stories are powerful," Kwame said, his voice resonating with controlled anger. "And they are not just anecdotes. For months, we've been investigating Officer Mallister's record." He opened the file. "Internal Affairs has received 17 civilian complaints against Officer Mallister over the past 10 years. Excessive force, illegal searches, verbal abuse, racial profiling." He paused. "Of those 17 complaints, how many resulted in disciplinary action?" He looked around the room. 0. Every single one was dismissed. Unsubstantiated. Officer acted within policy. Buried. The air crackled with outrage. 17 complaints. 0 consequences. The pattern was stark, undeniable. Suddenly, a path cleared near the back. A low hum accompanied the slow, deliberate movement of a wheelchair. Judge Evelyn Harper navigated through the standing crowd, her presence commanding immediate silence and respect. She positioned herself near the front, her sharp eyes scanning the faces, acknowledging the pain and the anger. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice, though aged, carried the weight of authority and lived experience. "They think we are isolated grievances," she began, her gaze sweeping across the diverse assembly. "They rely on our silence, our fear, our exhaustion. They dismiss Diego's son as one bad kid, Ayan's community as other, Marisol as a troublemaker. They file away the complaints, confident the dots will never be connected." She leaned forward slightly, her hands resting on the wheels of her chair, symbols not of limitation but of the journey she had traveled. "But look at us. Listen to these stories. Diego's son is not an isolated case. The fear in Ayan's community is not unfounded. Marisol's arrest is not an anomaly." Her voice grew stronger, imbued with the fire that had burned since Chicago. "We are not isolated grievances." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, heavy with implication. "We are a pattern." The word struck like a match. The collective understanding, the shared recognition of systemic injustice ignited the room. It wasn't just Mallister. It was the system that enabled and protected him. "What do we want?" someone shouted from the back. "Justice," the crowd roared back. "When do we want it?" "Now." Fatima Hassan, standing near the front, raised her fist. Her voice, young but powerful, cut through the air. "Indict Mallister. Convict Mallister." Amir joined in, his voice cracking with passion. "Send the killer cops to jail." The chant caught fire, spreading through the room like wildfire. raw and unified. Indict. Convict. Send the killer cops to jail. Indict. Convict. Send the killer cops to jail. It was a roar of collective pain transformed into collective power, echoing off the community center walls, spilling out into the cold Detroit night. Evelyn watched, a flicker of grim satisfaction in her eyes. The coalition was forming. The light was beginning to dawn. Mallister and the system he represented had underestimated the power of connected voices, of shared truth. They had brought the wrong woman to court and in doing so had galvanized the very community they sought to suppress. The fight was far from over, but tonight, hope felt tangible, forged in the heat of shared outrage and collective resolve. The federal courtroom was imposing, all polished wood and high ceilings designed to inspire awe and convey the gravity of the proceedings. Yet, the atmosphere was electric, charged with the energy spilling over from the community mobilization. Activists, community members, and press filled the gallery, a silent testament to the stakes involved. Marisol sat at the defendant's table, flanked by Kwame, her composure a stark contrast to the turmoil of the preceding months. The case had escalated, federal prosecutors, spurred by the Bodega footage and the mounting evidence of a pattern of civil rights violations, had taken over. Officer Ryan Mallister, stripped of his badge pending the outcome, sat with his defense team, his face a mask of resentment. The prosecution, led by Assistant U.S. Attorney Lena Petrov, a sharp, no-nonsense lawyer whose family had immigrated from Ukraine seeking refuge from corruption, had built a meticulous case. But the linchpin was Kwame Okoro's cross-examination of Mallister. Mallister took the stand, projecting an air of aggrieved duty. He recounted his version of the arrest, Marisol inciting violence, resisting, kicking him. He denied planting any evidence, sticking to the unfortunate malfunction story regarding his body cam. Kwame approached the witness stand, calm and methodical. Officer Mallister, he began, his voice even, you testified that Ms. Vega was inciting a riot. Can you describe the specific actions that constituted incitement? Mallister shifted. She was yelling, stirring people up against the police. Yelling about police brutality? About accountability? Is exercising one's First Amendment right now considered incitement in Detroit? Objection. Mallister's lawyer interjected. Sustained. Rephrase, Mr. Okoro. Kwame nodded. Officer, you stated Ms. Vega kicked you as you placed her in the patrol car, leading to the assault charge. Is that correct? Yes. She was violent. Kwame paused, then signaled for the Bodega surveillance video to be played on the large courtroom monitors. The grainy footage filled the screens, Mallister grabbing Marisol, her clear lack of physical resistance, the subtle flick of his wrist near the trash can, the discovery of the baggie. And crucially, no kick. Just Mallister shoving her into the car. Officer Mallister, Kwame said, his voice cutting through the stunned silence, this footage, taken from Mr. Kim's security camera, shows the entire interaction. Can you point out to the jury where Ms. Vega assaults you? Where she kicks you? Mallister stared at the screen, his face paling. The angle, it doesn't show everything, doesn't it? Kwame pressed. Or does it show something else entirely? Does it show you, Officer Mallister, planting that baggie of narcotics near Ms. Vega's feet? I did no such thing. That's taken out of context. Mallister blustered, his voice rising. Then let's talk about context, Kwame said smoothly. Let's talk about the 17 prior complaints filed against you with Internal Affairs. Complaints alleging excessive force, illegal searches, racial profiling. None resulting in discipline. Does that sound like the context of an officer committed to upholding the law? Objection. Relevance. Overruled. The witness may answer. Mallister glared, trapped. Those complaints were baseless smears by criminals and agitators. Like Diego Rivera's son? Like the people afraid to report crimes in their own neighborhoods? Kwame's questions landed like blows. Who authorized the evidence tampering, officer? Was it standard procedure for dealing with agitators? Mallister drew himself up, falling back on his shield. I serve this city, he snarled, his eyes fixed on Kwame with undisguised hatred. I do what needs to be done to maintain order. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically. Lena Petrov called witnesses who corroborated the pattern of harassment. Then she called Judge Evelyn Harper. Evelyn wheeled herself to the witness stand, her presence commanding attention. She wasn't testifying about Marisol's arrest directly, but about the history, the context. Under Petrov's careful questioning, she spoke of her time as a public defender in Chicago, of the case of Marcus Jones, of the corrupt officer Kowalski, of the fight to exonerate her husband, Isaiah. What I witnessed then, Evelyn stated, her voice clear and steady. And what the evidence suggests in this case now is a pattern where certain officers believe they are above the law they are sworn to uphold. They target individuals, often from marginalized communities, often those who dare to speak out, using intimidation, fabricated evidence, and the shield of their badge and the silence of their colleagues. She looked towards the jury. Mr. Mallister's alleged actions against Ms. Vega are not happening in a vacuum. They echo decades of similar abuses that thrive when good officers remain silent and oversight fails. Her testimony provided the crucial link, framing Marisol's arrest not as an isolated incident, but as part of a long, painful history of systemic injustice. The prosecution's most stunning blow came next. Lena Petrov presented Exhibit D, a ledger. Not a police log, but a meticulously kept personal ledger seized from Mallister's home during the investigation. It detailed payments, dates, and initials corresponding to specific addresses. This ledger, Your Honor, Petrov announced, details a kickback scheme. Officer Mallister received payments from several slumlords in exchange for harassing tenants, ignoring code violations, and providing extra patrols to intimidate those organizing for better housing conditions. She pointed to specific entries. Payments often coincided with arrests or evictions at those properties. It seems maintaining order was quite profitable. A gasp went through the courtroom. The motive wasn't just control or prejudice, it was greed. Mallister's carefully constructed image of a dedicated public servant crumbled. But the most devastating testimony was yet to come. The prosecution called Lily Mallister. Lily walked to the stand, trembling slightly, avoiding her father's gaze. Her voice was quiet, barely audible at first, but filled with a painful resolve. She recounted the confrontation in the kitchen, her father's anger, his denials. Then Petrov asked the crucial question. Ms. Mallister, did your father ever speak to you about his views on protesters or people he arrested? Lily took a deep breath, tears glistening in her eyes. She looked directly at the jury, then briefly, heartbreakingly, at her father, whose face was now ashen. Yes, she whispered. Sometimes, when he was angry or after a few drinks, he'd rant. He'd talk about teaching thugs lessons, about how protesters were vermin that needed to be swept off the streets. He bragged sometimes about making arrests stick, about how his word was always enough. She choked back a sob. He said his badge made him untouchable. The courtroom was utterly silent. The weight of a daughter's testimony, the betrayal born of conscience, hung heavy in the air. Ryan Mallister slumped in his chair, the last vestiges of his defiant facade gone, replaced by a look of utter devastation. He hadn't just brought the wrong woman to court, he had created the witness who would ultimately seal his fate. Chapter 6, The Reckoning. The guilty verdict echoed in the tense courtroom, not with a triumphant roar, but with a collective, held breath released. Ryan Mallister, convicted on federal charges of civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and conspiracy related to the kickback scheme, stood stone-faced as he was led away. For Marisol, for Kwame, for Evelyn watching from the gallery, it was a moment of profound, weary validation. Justice, this time, had bent towards the light, but the fall of one officer, however symbolic, wasn't the end. Outside the courthouse, the protests continued, shifting focus. Chants of one down, more to go, and systemic change now replaced the calls for Mallister's conviction. The coalition forged in the community center understood that Mallister was a symptom, not the disease. The fight for real accountability, for deep-rooted reform, had just begun. The pressure mounted on City Hall. Mayor Sofia Alvarez, Detroit's first Latina mayor, a pragmatic politician who understood the currents of her city, knew that symbolic gestures wouldn't suffice. She had watched the trial, seen the power of the community's unified voice, recognized the undeniable pattern Evelyn Harper had so eloquently described. Weeks later, standing on the steps of Detroit City Hall, flanked by community leaders, Mayor Alvarez announced a landmark initiative, the creation of a fully empowered civilian oversight board for the Detroit Police Department. This board would have independent investigative authority, subpoena power, and direct input on police training and disciplinary actions. And in a move that sent ripples through the city, she announced its co-chairs, Marisol Vega, whose ordeal had catalyzed this moment, and Mr. J. Kim, the quiet bodega owner whose courage had provided crucial evidence. Accountability cannot be an internal affair, Mayor Alvarez declared, her voice firm. It must be rooted in the community our officers serve. This board represents a commitment to transparency, to justice, and to rebuilding trust. Amidst the cautious optimism and the ongoing demands for further action, Evelyn Harper summoned Kwame Okoro to her apartment. The afternoon sun streamed through the window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. She wheeled herself over to a bookshelf laden with legal texts and Isaiah's bound volumes of his newspaper. From a locked drawer, she retrieved a worn, leather-bound journal. "This was Isaiah's," she said, her voice soft, holding the journal with reverence. His notes, his thoughts, his anger, his hope. Everything he fought for, everything he believed in. She extended it to Kwame. "He documented the patterns long before we had the tools Amir and Fatima use today. He understood that the fight is long, that victories are often incremental, that the fire needs constant tending." Kwame took the journal, feeling the weight of history in his hands. "Judge, I don't know what to say." Evelyn smiled, a rare, warm expression that softened the lines on her face. "Say you'll keep fighting. Say you'll keep bringing the light." Her eyes held the unwavering conviction that had defined her life. "Keep the fire burning, Kwame. For Isaiah. For Marisol. For all the others whose stories haven't yet been heard." Epilogue. Months later, on a brick wall flanking the Detroit Community Center, a new mural bloomed, vibrant against the urban landscape. Lily McAllister, finding solace and purpose in her art, stood back, surveying her work. The mural depicted Marisol Vega not in handcuffs but standing strong, addressing a diverse crowd. At her feet lay a shattered police badge, its pieces reflecting the faces of Diego Rivera, Ian Mohammed, Mr. Kim, Evelyn Harper, Kwame Okoro, Amir, and Fatima Hassan. Below the image, in bold, elegant script, was the caption, "Accountability is a collective duty." Lily knew the mural wouldn't erase the pain, her father's crimes, or the deep systemic issues that remained. But it was a testament, a marker of a battle fought and won, a reminder of the coalition that had formed, and a promise of continued vigilance. It was her way of contributing to the light, of honoring the truth, however painful. The conviction of one officer, the formation of an oversight board, these were not endpoints. They were milestones on a much longer road. The echoes of injustice still lingered in courtrooms, in community centers, in the quiet anxieties of neighborhoods long overlooked. The work continued, fueled by memory, resilience, and the unwavering belief in the power of collective action. When the gavel falls, it's not an end, it's the echo of 1,000 silenced voices demanding to be heard. Thanks for watching. Hope this story of resilience and the fight for justice brought value and sparked reflection. Want more impactful narratives? Help spread awareness and support our channel. Like, share, and subscribe for future stories.